This is episode number 139 featuring Michael Obermeyer, and you're about to discover a new way to make color and paint bolder, plus a way to sell paintings in a recession and a lot more.
This is the PleinAir Podcast with Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. In the PleinAir Podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called PleinAir, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein air. Others say plain air. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Eric Rhodes.
Thank you, Jim Kipping, and welcome to the PleinAir Podcast. I'm Eric, and it's hard to believe it's almost Labor Day weekend, and summer is almost over. Ugh, love summer. I hope you're getting a lot of painting in. I'm getting excited because in just 3 weeks, me and 100 of my closest friends are going to be going to Georgia O'Keeffe's Ghost Ranch in New Mexico. That's already sold out. I wish I could invite you to that, but we'll have some other things, including the Adirondacks coming up in June, which will be the 10-year anniversary of that event. Also, in October, our Fine Art Connoisseur Art Trip is making a pilgrimage to the land of Van Gogh, Gauguin, Corot, and others in the south of France, Provence and Nice, plus some of us are going on to Scotland after that. And I've got a pre-painting trip group going to a quaint French mountain village called St. Paul de Vence, which has a lot of art history. There's still a couple of seats left on that art event. You can find out more at finearttrip.com. And of course, the next big thing, the PleinAir Convention. We've already, believe it or not, here we are, fall, have exceeded last year's attendance numbers, and the event isn't even until May. I shouldn't even say last year's attendance numbers. It's this year's attendance numbers. Back in April, we have already attended those numbers. And of course, the event will be May in 2020 in Denver. And we expect that to sell out real early. So if you're not booked yet, it's the place you want to be. And you probably want to learn more about that at pleinairconvention.com. Lots going on. I'm sorry to bug you with all this, but there's also, we're at the halfway point to enter the PleinAir Salon art competition, the August-September competition. Enter your best paintings in one of 20 categories, and you could win some of the 23 grand in prizes, including the $15,000 main page. Imagine yourself on the cover of PleinAir magazine in the newsstands. How cool is that? We had a lot of people who've won this who nobody ever heard of before this. And so Tom Hughes recently won back in April. Just go to pleinairsalon.com. And coming up after the interview, I'm going to answer some art marketing questions in the Marketing Minute. But first, let's get right to our interview with Michael Obermeyer. Michael Obermeyer, welcome to the PleinAir Podcast.
Thank you, Eric. It's good to finally speak with you live.
I was trying to think about the first time we ever met, and I think it was before I started the magazine in Sonoma, in California. I think they were there was a festival there and that Keith Wicks put on, and I think that's where we first met. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think it does. Back in it must have been 2002 or 2003, Sonoma PleinAir, their first year, and it was before you had the magazine. And I got to tell you, at the time I thought a PleinAir magazine would be a little too specific. Like, what do I know? I just figured anything I was interested in doing probably wouldn't be worthy of a magazine. But was I wrong? Because that magazine has just been like kind of like a Bible for all of the PleinAir painters, so including myself.
Well, I know that people thought I was nuts, and there were times when I thought I was nuts too.
Well, you knew what you were doing, so.
Well,
it's the painters who are nuts.
No, sometimes these things work out and don't work out. And if you may or may not remember, when I first started PleinAir magazine, it was a pretty early, the movement that we have today did not exist at the time. And if you remember, there were probably not more than 3 or 4 plein air events around the country, if that. And Plein Air Magazine, I think we started it in 2004, if I remember correctly, and it started, but the advertisers said plein air is too narrow. The art materials people said there's not enough people to buy plein air art materials, and so we won't support you. And the galleries said nobody buys plein air paintings, and so we won't support you. And we really tried it very hard for a couple of years, and then we really had a hard time succeeding, so we closed it down and changed the name to Fine Art Connoisseur, which was a broader collector-type magazine, still in existence. And then I waited, a few years, 2 or 3 or 4 years, and until I felt like there was a better chance. And the way we did it is, I said, if we can survive on subscribers only, without any advertising, then we'll do that. And that's when I relaunched it and got enough subscribers, and then the advertisers started jumping on board. So thankfully the timing was right in that case.
Yeah, timing, and about that time is when I think Telluride was starting up, and Sedona, and a few others, the plein air exhibitions. So, and then we were teaching more workshops too. So more people were getting involved with plein air. And it just became such a, not only, I wouldn't want to say easy, but enjoyable and type of painting, and people getting outdoors and traveling. And like you said, it kind of spread like wildfire. I mean, the wave was just really building back then.
You were pretty early in.
Yeah, I was. I started with La Papa right as they were starting out. I was getting in the late 90s. I was an illustrator, and I first saw plein air paintings back in the 80s. I was delivering some illustrations to the Fieldstone Company here in Newport Beach, and they had a collection of the early California plein air painters. They had William Lent and Hanson Puthoff and all these on the wall, and I was taken back by how beautiful they were. And I'm an outdoors person. I'm always out hiking or biking, and these paintings just captured my eye, and I could feel the cool air, and I could smell the coastal sage in their paintings and the oaks. And I had never seen that. I mean, growing up, landscape paintings were the most boring subject, for artwork. I was preferred figurative and portrait, but seeing these plein air pieces, I knew that these guys were actually outdoors, capturing that light perfectly. So I wanted to try that, and then I would do a little on the side as an illustrator. And when I jumped full-time into plein air painting in the late 90s, La Papa was just kind of fledgling, getting started, and it gave me an opportunity to meet these guys and go out and paint with a few of them, Ken Oster and Syme and John Cosby and those guys. And when you can go out and paint with other people, it really boosts your confidence and helps you a lot, So for me, it was a perfect combination of being outside and doing what I love to do, which is painting and drawing.
Well, there certainly was not a movement at that time. There were obviously a few people doing it, but I'll bet nationwide there were fewer than 150 people painting outdoors. I mean, there were probably some people doing it that we don't know about, but why do you think this movement has really blossomed?
I think it just goes back to, the early French Impressionists, the early American Impressionists, being outside and recording. Well, first of all, you're going out to these gorgeous landscapes or scenes to paint. Most of the exhibitions are in beautiful locations throughout the country, and who doesn't want to go there and paint? And I just think it's a good exercise in painting, whether you're a studio painter or a plein air painter, is to go outside and see things firsthand and try to record everything in front of you firsthand, the values and the colors, and that's a fun challenge. And I think with some of the beautiful paintings that were being created plein air as finished pieces that could sell, I think that it's kind of spurred an interest in plein air painting and collecting. Because early on it was the plein air paintings were just sketches for studio paintings, and now they're finished pieces on their own right.
I think there are people who would debate that, though. And I'm not debating it, but I think there are a lot of people who think that there should never be a plein air painting sold as is that it should only be used to inform studio work. How do you feel about that concept?
Yeah, I don't agree with that at all. I mean, you're going out and capturing. Basically, you're painting light. For me, it's not about painting a mountain or a bridge or a city. It's a street. It's about how the light falls on that mountain and how the light falls on the ocean or that city street. And that's its own kind of subject. And when you paint portraits live, you're not doing a sitting for a future studio painting. It's alla prima and it's live, and it's different than studio work. I mean, certainly studio work, you can do larger, grander paintings than the smaller scale plein air paintings, but I don't think they're any less valuable. In fact, I see my plein air work as almost more valuable because it was done on scene, and it's almost a true capture of that hour or two that it took me to paint it, and it traveled with me wherever I went, and that just gives me a little more confidence in the work I do outside. So I think it's go ahead.
Do you do a lot of studio work as well?
I'd say most of my work is, depending on the time of year, most of it's plein air, probably 70%. This summer, unfortunately, I've been stuck in the studio doing some commissions and larger pieces. Right now, I'm doing a larger painting from a plein air study. But I prefer my plein air work because I can trust the colors and values. I know I got them firsthand painting outdoors, whereas in the studio, I'm referring to the painting or photographs, which usually don't work quite as well. And I have a time limit outside, and that time limit is good for me because I'm a very impatient and quick painter. So I know that I'm getting it out loose and fresh, and the true colors and values that I see, I feel like I'm recreating on the canvas. So I'd much rather plein air paint than studio paint.
One thing I've noticed is I was reviewing your artwork at your website prior to this recording, and which, by the way, is michaelobermeyer.com. And looking at how your work has developed since I knew you, I'm looking at work that could hold its own with Payne and Wendt and some of those guys. They really have that classic California plein air feel. The colors are not overly garish. There's a touch of tonalism to them, and it's really amazing to see what you've done. Of course, time will do that, time and practice, but that alone is probably not enough. How do you develop as a painter? What's that process like?
Well, I think it's important to go out to museums, look at good work, and know why it's a good painting, and find out what attracts your eye. I've always loved atmosphere. Hanson, Putoff, and Sam Hyde-Harris, a couple of California painters, were my favorites because they really captured the light and the atmosphere here on the coast. And I think just going out and observing constantly. I mean, when I'm driving, no matter where I'm going, I'm always painting in my mind 24 hours a day, and it drives my family crazy. But, sometimes I want to experiment, try something slightly different. And like I said, it's good to change and evolve. I remember at one point I was getting very dark and atmospheric and almost tonalist. And my wife mentioned that. She said, your painting is getting a little dark and purplish. And I was trying to explain that it's the time of day I'm painting right now. She's a nurse. What does she know? And then one of my gallery owners up in Carmel said, a lot of the collectors were kind of complaining that your work's getting darker. So immediately I snapped to attention and decided, I better do something about that. And I added, one color to my palette, burnt sienna, and kind of revised it and got some tips from a couple of painter friends. And all of a sudden my paintings changed and evolved and got brighter, but not garish. They just got a little warmer in tone and kind of evolved. So
why do you think
it's good?
Why do you think that happened to you? Was there a particular reason? Was it something you were just preferring?
I think it was just something that was attracting me, that kind of like moody light at the time. And then I introduced maybe like, I think at that time I introduced like a raw umber, which I'd been using in portrait painting, into my landscape palette. And it's amazing when you put one additional color into a palette of 7 colors, it can really affect your work. And, I would see something and visualize what I wanted it to look like. And I was getting away from all the brighter Southern California paintings that I was doing. So, but as an artist, we're always like the last to figure out what we need to do to our work. So much easier for other people to say, "Hey, what is wrong with it?"
Well, there's wisdom in multiple counselors, as they say, and it's nice to get feedback.
It is, and it's nice to have people you can trust and know and respect what they have to say, and you have to be a little humble because we always think our work sometimes is just dead on what we wanted, and sometimes we get away from the main vision or what we're trying to communicate here.
What do you think is the track that you went through in terms of what your art started out looking like and what it evolved to today? Is that something that is a track that is pretty typical of most artists? They kind of start out with one thing and end up with something else. And what was it for you?
Yeah, I think, when I started out, I think my colors were a lot brighter. Just really learning about mixing colors and values. I finally studied with a Spanish painter down in San Diego, Sebastian Capella, and he gave me the palette that I use today at 7 colors. So that stayed consistent all these years. But the look of my work has changed. And I think it's more of just experimenting, looking at other painters, older, some contemporary and some in the past, and just trying different things. I know that I went to an Anna Hill show. She's a California painter who kind of helped found the Laguna Art Association back in the 1920s. And they had a show for her at the Laguna Art Museum a few years back, and she paints with a lot of palette knife, which I don't. And I went to see it because the show was almost over, and she had these beautiful paintings, but I saw how she mixed the paint with a knife and applied it on the canvas, and it just like a light went off inside me, like maybe I should mix my paint with a knife like I'm supposed to, and maybe I can then push it around. And that really changed my look again, as far as mixing more paint, pushing it around with the knife, and then coming in with a brush and kind of recarving shapes. And I was painting thicker and just juicier color, happy accidents happening. And I think over time, this is the next step for me. I've always wanted to loosen. Being an illustrator as a very tight painter and renderer, if you will. And I always figured as a plein air painter, I'd be very loose, almost Monet-like, but that never happened. And this new step I'm using with a knife is just another step along the journey of not only loosening up, but evolving as a painter. And I just figure it's something that comes natural. The longer you paint, sometimes you run into happy accidents and you learn from those. Really, painting for me is just a learning experience, each one,
So the palette knife, I just want to make sure I have clarity on this. You started out by mixing colors with the palette knife, and then now you're laying the color on with the palette knife and then going into it with a brush?
Yeah, actually, I started out by the only reason I had a palette knife was to clean my palette after I was done painting. And so now I'm mixing the colors with the knife and applying it with the knife thicker directly on the canvas. And then I'll come back after I've pretty much covered all my big shapes with the knife. Now I can come back with a brush and kind of redraw it and reform some of the shapes and paint thick against thick. And it's really a joy to paint this way, and I've gone through a heck of a lot more paint, but fewer brushes.
Well, the paint manufacturers like that, so that's okay.
Yeah, right. Utrecht and Gamblin, they don't know it, but they're making a lot more money off me right now.
Well, I'm sure they're happy about that.
Yeah.
So a lot of artists started out as illustrators. But of course, a lot of us didn't have that benefit of that training. In what ways did that inform your work, and in what ways did it hurt it?
Well, I think being an illustrator really helped with design and composition, just drawing ability and perspective. I went right when I jumped into painting. I remember one of my instructors said, "Oh, you're really a beautiful designer. Your compositions are dead on." And I wasn't really thinking or putting any thought into compositions. I was just drawing it out as I visualized it. And I always loved drawing growing up, and I always feel like I'm better at drawing than painting. And so when I got into plein air painting, my first thought was, I'm going to show people how well I can draw. And these paintings would be so tight and have so much information. My wife would look at them and say, "Why don't you just take a photo then if you're going to paint like that?" And every time I'd go out to do a plein air painting, she'd remind me, "Remember, today you're a painter, not an illustrator." So
wow.
I just
tough critic.
Yeah. Oh yeah, she's very good. She's my biggest critic, and it's good to have someone like that who's honest. But so I think that as much as illustration trained my eye for composition and drawing ability, it really hurt as far as wanting to give too much information. And I had to relearn or really learn how to edit out so much information and squint while I'm painting and leave out the unimportant sub pieces of the painting to make it a successful piece. And the drawing does have to be strong. You have to have a strong drawing foundation, but you don't have to shove it down people's throat. The painting is a big part of it.
So how do you know what to
leave
out?
So that's always been a challenge. How do I know what?
How do you know what to leave out?
Yeah, that's experience. Just going out and painting. What I do is the first thing I do when I sit down to paint is, why have I chosen this scene, and stick with that. And then I squint a lot, and then I just realize, okay, what do I want to say about this scene and what's not important, and it's just experience. For a long time, I was putting way too much in the foreground. I thought if I could just cut off the bottom third of all my paintings, they'd be really strong, So I finally, you learn, you talk to other painters, and you look at other paintings and see why theirs work. If I have a particular area that always troubles me, I'll just kind of focus on other people's work and see how they handled it. It's always good to learn from other painters and try to solve that problem. But I still go out and make some really bad decisions. But mostly, simplify. I think I learned that from Ken Oster way back. Just basic shapes.
Yeah, what a great man he was.
Yeah, he was really helpful for me early on. He was a great mentor of mine.
Yeah,
he would give me great advice.
His was the first workshop that I ever took when I first discovered plein air painting, so had a big influence on my life as well. So what's your process like now, now that you've integrated this palette knife painting into your system? Are you, tell us how you paint. How do you start a painting? Do you do a thin underpainting? What's your process?
Yeah, the first thing I do is I'll just do a quick wash, real thin burnt sienna tone, and rub it off with a paper towel just to have some sort of tone underneath. And I start drawing in with a brush, a large brush, my shapes. I don't draw with a pencil on the canvas. I'm really quick at drawing, and I always tell my students, paint like your hair's on fire. So, you don't have a lot of time. So find out I might do a small pencil sketch. I have a tiny notebook, a sketchbook in my pack, and if I can't decide, where I want to put the horizon line, or if I should move this tree over, I might do a quick thumbnail sketch, which takes maybe 30 seconds, just to solve a few problems. And then I just start brushing it in, big shapes, and then with thin paint, so I can move them around. And now with the knife, I'll start mixing. I start with the foreground and with the dark shapes, and I just start mixing my color and laying some in with the knife as much as I can. And then I get the big brush and start pushing some of that around. I don't typically do just palette knife painting per se, but
So you're
Sometimes I'll
really
leave a lot
just
of the
using
knife
it to
work.
lay the paint in, and then you're manipulating it with a brush.
Yeah, correct. And there are some areas where I'll just leave the knife work. I like what it's done, and I like the texture it left. So I'm like, okay, I'm just leaving that the way it is. That looks great. But I'll come back with a brush, a nice big sable, and start pushing some of that around. Then I'll mix, and I work forward to backwards. I would start with my foregrounds, where the color is a little warmer and more intense, and work back and get a little cooler and lighter as it works back, especially here on the coast of California. We got this nice atmosphere, and everything cools down and into the distance, and that creates a nice kind of atmospheric perspective. So I'll start with the big bold shapes in the foreground, go to the middle ground, and then the background. And typically I can block the whole thing in about half an hour. Again, Ken Oster told me, you don't want to invest too much time in blocking it in, so that if it doesn't work, you're only giving yourself 30 minutes and you can always scrub it off or just walk away. So after a half hour, it's usually blocked in. And then when I'm finding out now, when I block it in with the knife, it looks like this abstract mess. And that's typically when the people come by who are just outside. They'll come by and look at my painting and kind of just, you can see them looking at it like it's going downhill fast. But then I get the brush and it all comes back together. It's like, no, just stick around for another half an hour. It's going to come through, I swear. But and then the last half of the painting is pretty much, controlling all the edges and bringing in smaller shapes into the big shapes. And typically about an hour and a half, 2 hours. I know if I've gone over 2 hours that I'm really working hard and struggling, or if I've got like 10 brushes out that I'm trying to find the right brush, it's going to bail me out. So there are little signs I have where I know if I'm having trouble or not.
Oster always talked about focal points being sharp, more chroma, et cetera. Do you kind of follow that?
Right. Yeah, but I don't think about it too much. Somebody asked me recently when I was doing the demo what my focal point was going to be. And it was this big panoramic scene. And I just thought, I don't know if there's a real focal point in this scene. It's just this atmosphere, back to this rolling valley, So I don't sit down and intellectually, put too much thought into my focal point. But I do think of what Ken said is with different chroma or with, like you said, harder edges or lines, even brushwork can lead you back to the focal point. If it's on a beach, I learned from him is putting that paint, having the brush strokes go back in perspective, back to that down the beach to lead your eye down the beach. And, you can use cloud shapes as well or waves to lead you back. So in that way I do use everything I can that Ken taught me.
So I noticed in looking at your website, you do a lot of figure and portrait work too. And I've recently discovered a quote from Yves Gamel, who was one of the great realists, studied under Paxson, who studied under Jerome. And Gamel was a plein air painter, not well known for plein air painting, but he insisted that his students plein air paint to inform their figure painting, but he also insisted that figure painters take up, the opposite. So you do a lot of both. You do figures outdoors and looks like in studio. Tell me about why that has an impact on your work, or does it?
No, I totally agree that I think anyone should go out, regardless if you're a studio painter or a figure painter, go out and paint outdoors, because for me, it just helps me to loosen up as a painter indoors, helps my brush work, helps how I see my subject. I love doing the figure and I love portraits because it forces me to draw, and I like to keep my drawing skills sharp. And, in our school, we were painting the figure, and I just, as an illustrator, I loved drawing anything. People, they would just, give me a subject and say, I need this in 3 days. Can you do it? And that's like, great. I just want to paint. I just want to draw. So drawing the portrait or the figure and painting the figure is a nice departure from the landscapes. And it's funny, when I'm indoors painting a portrait or painting a figure, I'm thinking to myself, this is as good as it gets. I love this. I cannot have more fun. Then I get out the next day and I'm out, on the beach painting, and I go, no, this is the best there is. So it's just a nice variety for me, I think, for my senses and for my skills to work on both. And yeah, I agree. I think our artists need to get out and not only paint outdoors, but paint the figure, draw the figure. It helps you to see, and it helps, for me, I learned from both as far as applying values and light. And with the figure, I can control the light and control what I want to say and how I want to create the scene, whereas I don't have as much control outdoors. So it's good to have a little of both and work on both.
Yeah, really informs your drawing skills as well. So you had, if I remember correctly, you had done some kind of a illustration program for the Air Force or something. Am I making that up, or is there something to that?
No, you're right. That was through the Society of Illustrators. And they have, the Air Force has an Air Force art program. And it's been going on for, I think, 40, 50 years. They would take artists out during the Vietnam War on bombing missions to record, so they could record and do paintings and illustrations of the combat. And when I joined the Society of Illustrators in 81 or 82, they had these trips. Every 2 years, they'd fly all the artists to Washington, D.C., this black tie dinner where they would present the paintings. And what you do is you do a painting for them, and you donate the painting, they frame it, and then you get the rank of colonel while you're there. You're put on base at Andrews Air Force Base, and it's really fun. They fly all the artists out in a C-141 together, and you can imagine how much fun we'd have on that. And during the interim, if you needed work, they would have these trips, and you could sign up to go on a trip to get some reference. So I've had some great opportunities with the Air Force. On one trip, I got to actually fly on an F-16 training mission over South Dakota.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was a highlight of my career, and flew down to the Amazon and stayed in Panama. Flew with air refueling missions out over the Northwest. Gone to a few rocket launches, and it was great. Everything was free. It was actually thanks to all our tax dollars, but and we'd have the rank of colonel wherever we went. It was it was really fun. It was really informative, and I just have so much respect for everyone in the Air Force. Just great people and helpful, and you really learn a lot, not only about the Air Force but as an artist. You go out and we'd take a lot of photographs, do a lot of sketching, and then come back to the studio and do some paintings. And after trips like that, you just want to do the best you can for the Air Force.
And what was the purpose, though? Why did they want paintings when they could have photographs?
Yeah, they have paintings, and then they're all around the world. They'll put them in different bases throughout the world. Some are in the Smithsonian and the Pentagon, in recruiting stations. And the collection they have, I think it's over 20,000 pieces now of art, and they're just beautiful. Everything from portraits to historical paintings. The last one I did was a famous bombing mission in World War II, and it was a little more painterly because I'd been doing plein air for a while. And I got to meet this pilot who was on the mission, and he actually signed the painting for the Air Force and handed it over to them. And I think that one's hanging in the Pentagon now. So they have, God bless the Air Force for recognizing the arts and starting something like this.
Now, you live in Laguna, correct?
Yeah, my studio's in Laguna, and I live just outside of Laguna Beach city limits where I could afford a house with a yard. It's funny, when I grew up, I think I told my grandmother, used to remind me that I told her I was going to be an artist and have a lot of animals and live in a treehouse in Laguna, and I would take care of her. But now I couldn't even afford a tree in Laguna.
So there's a rich history in Laguna. You have the Festival of the Arts. Are you ever involved in that? And I think it's kind of curious. I don't know much about it, but I think the locals obviously do, where they have the live paintings. Are you ever involved in any of those things?
Oh, yeah, Eric, you've got to come down and check out the Pageant of the Masters. If you've never seen it, you have to at least once see it, and every year it changes. But I've been in the Festival of Arts for 22 years now, so get juried in each year, and knock on wood, I haven't been juried out yet, but and it's great. It's a wonderful exposure. It's on for 2 months, all of July and all of August. It's up 24 hours. They have security there. I don't have to be there. They have a sales booth that takes 15% if the painting is sold to the sales booth. But it's just wonderful. And there's 130 artists, all different kinds of artists. There's jewelers and woodworkers, representational painters, and abstract. And then each night they have the Pageant of the Masters, which is like living pictures, which it's an outdoor bowl. It's beautiful, live orchestra. It's really, really exciting. It's something so unique that it's hard to describe unless you've seen it. And my family and I were actually cast members for that back, in the early 2000s. My daughter did it from the age of 4 to 14. I did it for 7 years. And my wife and I were in a piece where we kissed each night. We were the VJ Day poster of that nurse kissing the sailor. And so we got to get in that pose each night in the pageant. And then I'd go out to my booth afterwards and, show my work. It's a great gig. And the exposure you get from that, year round. I'll have emails or calls from people who saw something in the summer and they want to commission me for a piece. So it's not too bad.
Yeah, it sounds like, and 22 years in a row. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and they have great music each night. I go there in the evenings when the crowd comes to the pageant. They have wonderful live music. It's just a great place to kind of interact with the other artists and have a glass of wine and talk to people about your work who come by and take a look at it.
And also, if I remember correctly, you've been painting about the same amount of time with the Laguna Invitational. Is that right?
Yeah, with Papa. That's right. I think I'm the only one now who's done all 20. This will be their 21st year. 21 invitationals. Somehow I've survived and not made the cut. But yeah, they started that in 98, I guess it was 99, and it used to be in July, and then they moved to October for better weather and less traffic in Laguna. And I'll tell you, that show has just grown. It started going down a little bit, like most of the PleinAir, shows typically burn out a little bit. And then once Rosemary Swim got involved and the new board, they really started working and tinkering with it, and it's just gone on the kind of the upswing ever since, for the last 10 years. And now it's just a huge thing that the city really looks forward to. The collectors come out for it. It's a great place to paint. I have a wonderful host in that it's my family. I don't have to pay for anything. I can stay at home. But there's just so much to paint out here. And I've met so many incredible painters over the 21 years they've had it. Really nice to see painters and meet painters from different parts of the country who come out and paint in my backyard, and to see how they see Laguna Beach. I can learn from them.
Well, when I recorded Rosemary on a podcast about La Papa, I told her that show was the first PleinAir show I ever attended, and it was before I even painted or even knew I was going to become a painter. And it was, I just happened to be on vacation in Laguna probably, 22 years ago. Maybe I'm not sure when it was. And I remember walking into the museum. I think they held it at the museum at the time, and it was right there on the water. And I saw a painting that I had never seen a PleinAir painting before, and I was just blown away by it. And I remember it was $600, and I walked outside to talk to my wife about whether or not we should get it, because $600 was like, might as well have been $50,000 to us at the time. And we decided we would do it because we never had owned an original painting before, and we walked in and it was gone. I can still remember that painting to this day. I don't know who did it, because I didn't know any of the artists' names at the time. But that,
Wow.
that probably implanted a seed somewhere along the line that got me involved in this whole plein air thing.
Well, yeah, it's a good thing you were there then. At $600 is a great price, I think, for any painting in the Invitational. Can't imagine. Yeah, I have 1 year, Scott Burdick, the painter from North Carolina, he painted me on the beach. We were together painting, and he said, "Do you mind if I paint you?" And I'm like, "Oh, sure." And he does this big 18 by 24 of me from the waist up, face on, painting from my palette. And then, later on, I said, "This is great, Scott." He goes, "Well, I'll trade with you." But Scott was selling out every year. And all I could think of is just what you said, is I don't want to see that painting of me that he titled Michael Obermeyer on the wall of the museum with a red dot on it. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to buy this. Like, why did he paint it so large? Can he have done a 9 by 12?
Yeah.
But it's like, but I ended up buying it just out of fear of having someone else walk off with a painting I really wanted. So, and 15 years later, I'm really happy to have that painting in my living room. So.
Yeah.
But there's some, like I said, just beautiful work that pulled out of that show, and it's unbelievable.
So you've had a lot of really incredible experiences because you've been painting outdoors for so many years. Any one or two in particular come to mind that are very memorable for you, other than the one that you just mentioned?
Yeah, you can imagine 23 or 24 years of plein air gives you a lot of stories. I remember being sent out to Paris, France, by a few couples in Laguna Beach. One year they saw a painting I had done in the Loire Valley, and they said, "Hey, if we pay for you, would you go to Paris and paint for us?"
No.
And I thought, yeah. And my wife said, "Yeah, that'll never happen." And all of a sudden they recruited a few couples, and they said, "How much do you need? Let us know your budget." And I came up with this budget for 2 weeks, 3 weeks in Paris, and they said, "Okay, here you go." And so I landed in Paris. I invited a couple of painting friends with me, and just got on the ground like, well, here I go. And I spent 3 weeks painting in Paris. It's anything I wanted. A couple of them had specific sites, but it was just pure joy. And my daughter flew out the last week, and we just had fun enjoying Paris after that. And then I came home, and they just bought, not only they wanted larger pieces originally, but they not only bought those larger pieces, but they pretty much bought up all my plein air studies. So that was a really nice
So they
gig.
funded you to go, but they didn't even require you to give them a painting for the funding?
No, so what they do is say, okay, I'm going to give you $2,000, and in turn would like a painting with the same value.
I see. Okay.
And we'll pay for it. And then, so I said, okay. But so when I got back and they saw the plein air studies, I said, this is just a study for your painting. Okay, great. But we'd like to buy this too. And we'd like to buy this. They were great. They were really great supporters of the plein air movement in Paris. So that worked out well. And I've had other experiences that are the opposite, where, I had a prostitute come up to me once out in the desert. Which my wife told me not to tell that story. But I've had rattlesnakes and coyotes and bad weather. But I've got tons of stuff. I could go on and on.
Well, that's one of the joys of plein air painting, is that there are memories. I find that some of the paintings are hard to let go of because the memories are so strong. Do you ever keep some of what you've painted, or do you sell everything?
Oh, yeah, I agree with you. To me, it's a souvenir. I have a painting from Paris, one of my first ones I did when I was there, and I loved it, and it still hangs in my house. And I thought, okay, this one's for me. Usually when I go out on a trip, if there's something that's really memorable, has a good experience, I'll try to hang on to as long as I can. And to me, it's better than a photograph. It's better than a souvenir. It's actually, I look at the brushwork and say, I put that down live that late night in Paris. I remember that night so well, and this is kind of a beautiful little souvenir of that. So, I think it's important.
Yeah, I think so too. It's nice to hang on to some things. You don't want to give away everything or sell everything. You're pretty lucky to live in the area you live in, because there's such a rich history of plein air painting there. You've got some great galleries there that have historic works. Do you have a museum there with historic works too? Do you or not?
Yeah, the Irvine Museum, which is now going to be at UCI. It's a beautiful museum, and I know that it seems like all the painters who come for the Invitational make a pilgrimage over to the Irvine Museum. I always make the mistake of going after the Invitational is over, and I tell myself, why didn't I come here last week before we started painting? Because I get out of there and I'm so inspired, and it's almost as if I relearn how to paint by just looking at some of these early California painters and their paintings. And
Right.
It's wonderful to have that there. And then there's a couple of galleries in town, the Redfern Gallery, the Roos Gallery, where I can wander in and take a look at some of the early California collections they have as well.
Oh, those are great galleries.
Yeah, really nice. And even if I go and I'll walk the dog at night and the lights are on in the gallery, I can go by and not bother them and just look in the window at the paintings. It's funny. I can get depressed and inspired all at once.
So talk to me about the California Art Club, because you have the benefit of being a part of that organization, and that's probably been really helpful as a resource in your career.
Yeah, it has. And, I joined early on. I had trouble getting in as an artist member at first, but I was really impressed with the club. The first meeting I went to, Peter came up to me and greeted me by name and welcomed me to the club. And I thought, wow, how can he possibly know my name or remember me? And that's the kind of guy he is. And they would have these year-round shows or exhibitions or paint outs, and I would attend all of these and get to know a lot of the artists in the club, and started volunteering wherever I could. And I moved up in the club pretty well. I became signature member and then would volunteer to do mentorships. And they're just great people who are running the club. Peter and Elaine, the entire staff, who are just the friendliest and supportive group of people. And I just really wanted to give back. A few years ago, Peter talked to me about possibly being on the board and being a vice president. And, I kind of hemmed and hawed and thought about it for a few months, because I'm not the typical, board member or, someone who would be any part of a club that would want me on their board. I don't know if I'd want to be a part of. It's like Groucho Marx thing. But I thought about it, and then I just thought, I've always wanted to give back and help any way I can. So I accepted the position as vice president, just because they've done so much for me. I've done a lot of sales throughout the years with their exhibitions, and grown a lot as an artist by going to their meetings and meeting some of the other artists in the club. So this is an opportunity for me to kind of help out and give back. And I'm glad I have. I feel like I'm, in a way, a spokesman for the artist members of the club. And it's a joy to help make decisions and to keep everything moving in the right direction.
Well, one of the benefits of that organization, is, if you live locally, is there's so much to do. There's so many events. Of course, when I lived in the Bay Area, we had Northern California events, paint outs and things of that nature. But living right there where you have access to the lectures and the various things going on is absolutely fabulous. What a great organization it is. And you don't have to live in California to be a member, do you?
No, we have the members from outside of California, and then the chapters have grown. I think we have 11 different chapters throughout the state now to try to keep everybody active and to feel like they're part of the club as well. So they don't have to come down to Pasadena to be a part of the club. So there's so many shows and exhibitions and paint outs going up and down the state. And there's the out-of-state members. We have mentor members. It's really growing, which is pretty amazing. I think it's in its 110th year now, something like that. But they're doing a superb job of keeping it running and keeping it current and getting as many artists involved as possible. So my hat's off to them for continuing to do that.
Absolutely. I feel the same way. So before we wrap up here, I know that sometimes people like to get some tips on painting. And so I'd like you to think in terms of two categories. Category 1 would be beginners. Category 2 would be people who are experienced but want to go to a higher level. You have any thoughts or ideas that you want to share?
Yeah. Well, for beginners, I always tell them, go out, paint small canvases, and give yourself a time limit of an hour, and just use large brushes, and do as many as you can, and just start to squint and simplify everything. Don't put all the details in. Do it over and over again, and that trains your eye to see the right values and the right color, and to learn to edit out anything. I think most beginners get bogged down into painting too long and trying to include everything they see. And so I always tell them, simplify it, small 8x10 canvas or smaller, large brushes, and a severe time limit. Also, I tell everybody else, paint, like I said earlier, paint like your hair is on fire. I simplify my palette to 7 colors, and I'd go out, and I think it's pretty much the same advice for everyone: is simplify it and watch your time. Know why you chose a subject and stick to it. It might be the way the water is sparkling, on the coast, or the blue shadow on the side of a mountain. If that's what attracts you to that scene, then stick to it and remember that throughout the painting session. Don't chase the light. Don't try to get away from that. And then don't screw up the painting in the studio like I do. Stick to it and then move on to the next painting. And each painting for me is a learning lesson. And my best painting is always the next one. Don't get down on yourself. I have bad days where I just wonder why I went out and paint in the first place, and that keeps me humble. And so have confidence that the next painting is going to be a great one, and each one's a learning process.
Yeah, mistakes are growth. So don't look at them as failures. Look at them as lessons.
Absolutely, exactly. Bad painting's an opportunity to learn and to make your next painting even better.
What are your 7 colors?
I use ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, just a little bit of that. Phthalo green or viridian green I recommend for beginners, because phthalo can be acid.
It's everywhere.
But yeah, exactly. So viridian green's the same. It's a blue-green, basically. Alizarin crimson, cad red light, burnt sienna, and cad yellow light. And then titanium white. Lots of titanium white. And put a lot of it on the palette. I think that's another tip that most of my students, I probably say that the most. Get more paint out on the palette. You'll get a lot more use of it on your canvas than in the tube. So,
well, the other thing that I think we did not understand when we were students is the differences in paints. The typical response is to go to the store, probably, either a local art store or Michael's or something, and to buy the cheapest paint you can find, because why not, right? But you don't get the tinting power in some of those student grade paints. Is that, would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I was using the student grade paints for 10 years just because, as you said, they were cheaper and I get a lot more paint. And then I think one of my fellow painters said, "You're still painting with that?" Like, all of a sudden, I'm so embarrassed. I'm like, okay, I got to get rid of these. And went out and bought some really nice paints. Gamblin I love, and Utrecht titanium white I just adore. It's like
butter.
Like butter, and it feels good. And all of a sudden, you're right. I mean, there's a huge difference in quality paints and quality brushes. So it is good to invest, I think, in good paint. Even if you don't invest in brushes. For me, PleinAir painting, I go through brushes like crazy. So I'm constantly buying brushes. But the paint, to me, I think that's the most important. I typically do my best paintings on the cheapest board possible. It never fails. If I buy really good Belgian linen, I'll be so nervous about screwing up on such beautiful surface that I'll just do a second-rate painting. And when it's on the back of a just a canvas board from who knows where that costs nothing. Then I do these beautiful paintings because I'm free and easy and not worrying about it.
So how long have you been supporting yourself as an artist? Yourself and your family?
My whole life. I graduated with an illustration degree and went right into illustration. I got lucky enough to get hired full-time in the 90s by one of my clients as an in-house illustrator, and that worked out really well. And then made the jump to fine arts in the late 90s. Still did some freelance on the side just to keep the money flowing. But, it's just been fortunate and blessed enough to continue to do this. It's nice to have a wife who's a nurse. That helps, especially for medical benefits. And but this is all I've done. We had the big recession in 2008, and things changed a lot, and it was a big challenge for me because this is all I had ever done my entire life. And I was praying, what is my purpose here? I'm 50-something years old, and I can't find work anywhere else. And even my wife said, you got to start thinking about another form of income because the sales are down. And the quick story is I looked around for something. Nobody would hire a 55-year-old man. So I finally found a job at Starbucks in Laguna Beach and found out what real work is all about. And, being trapped working as a barista for 4 to 6 hours or 8 hours was just really hard. And after that, when I left, I realized I can make more money by really working on my craft and in advertising. And I got back, I started making more money, sales picked up, and realized that there are no bad days in painting. After that, it's every day that I can go out and paint or work in my studio is a blessing.
So there's a trick, and since you brought it up, I'll just touch on this. There's a trick that very few people know and understand. I can't use names for obvious reasons, but there was a gallery that when the recession of 2008 came, these people launched a brand new gallery, and everybody thought they were nuts. And they became an overnight sensation, and they became a huge gallery, very big and very fast. And the reason is that the guy who owned and ran that gallery used to be a professional financial consultant and understood recessions. And the same thing is true, by the way, for Kellogg's cereal. Kellogg's cereal was launched during the Depression and became the number one cereal overnight, even though Post used to be the number one cereal. And the key to that, in both cases, was advertising. When a recession takes place, everybody stops advertising because they look at that and they say, well, that's money out the door and I can't afford to advertise. And as a result, you have less noise, fewer people advertising, and you stand out and you can actually build a brand and get noticed faster in a recession because you don't have all the noise of all the other people trying to advertise. And so that's exactly what happened to you, and that's what happened to this gallery is, all their competitors got lazy and stopped advertising, and what happened is their businesses got worse, and as their businesses got worse, they started laying off people or changing their hours or stopped doing cocktail parties or all the things that they have to do to keep in business. And yet, if those people had just fueled their advertising, there's always people who have money during recessions. I remember talking to a gallery in New York, and he said, well, the people who were buying the $200,000 paintings have really cut back their budgets, and they're only buying $50,000 paintings now. But so there's always people who have money. I mean, bankruptcy attorneys are getting rich in the middle of recessions. So
that's right.
You just have to, you have to take a different perspective on it. So it's interesting that you would say that. Sorry to get off on that tangent.
No, I agree. And, out of sight, out of mind, especially in this profession, if you don't show up for a show, nobody really misses you. If you don't advertise, no one's going to notice. They'll notice when you do advertise. And you have to make a name for yourself and you have to work. And that's, I think, part of making a career out of this is the business aspect, which a lot of us aren't very strong at, but you have to keep pushing yourself.
Yeah, and the minute you disappear, you can have the biggest brand in the world, and 3 years, 5 years later, nobody knows who you are.
Absolutely. It's like, oh, what happened to that guy? God, I haven't seen him in years, and he just dropped off the face of the earth.
Yeah.
So, and you're right, there's always collectors out there. There's always people who are going to want really beautiful paintings. And you just got to keep your chin up, keep fighting. And if you really are passionate about it, that's what you do. And for me, this is what I do. And I've always done it. And so I really had no choice. And it kind of forces you to kind of reinvent yourself sometimes, or just to work a little harder, which is good.
Well, as I said in my Sunday Coffee blog recently, adversity, roadblocks are a good thing. They're healthy. We learn and grow from them. Well, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure. You're really a great guy. I'm looking forward to seeing you again one of these days soon. We kind of winked at each other at the PleinAir convention, but didn't get much time together. And
I really wanted to say hi, but I know you're a busy man, and thanks to you for what you do. And I did want to say one thing. I think they were asking what PleinAir exhibitions and conventions are they important to painters, and I think they're essential. Almost, it's such a solitary kind of profession, or whatever it is. If you do it as a hobby, they're very solitary, and it's so important to get out and to speak with other painters, to meet painters, even the suppliers, and to exchange stories. And it helps build the self-confidence, which you really need as a painter, because when I'm alone painting in the studio, the only person I'm having a conversation with is myself, and that never goes well. So it's great to get out and just to mingle with other, kindred spirits, as Jeff Horn used to say. So thanks for doing that, and for leading the community throughout the country. Appreciate that.
Well, somebody had to do it, but thank you very much for saying something. Well, again, this was a pleasure, Michael. Thanks for being on the PleinAir Podcast.
Thank you. My pleasure, and I'm honored.
What a great guy. Nice man, a really wonderful painter and teacher. I learned a lot from this one. Thank you to Michael Obermeyer. Shall we do some marketing stuff? Yeah, let's do it.
This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhodes, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art, Proven Techniques to Turn Your Passion into Profit.
In the Marketing Minute, I try to answer your marketing questions, which of course you can email to me, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. This is a question from Kara Hidalgo, Hidalgo. Hidalgo. I'm sorry, Kara. I'm sorry I botched your name. She asked, for those of us who work in multiple mediums, should we separate our marketing? For instance, should a sculptor and a painter have two different websites, one for each? Well, Kara, I think it's an interesting question, and I think it depends entirely on where you are in your career. If you're known and established in one area or both areas, I think you can get away with it. Artists are creative. They try to use different mediums. Sargent did watercolor and oil. George Carlson was a great sculptor and then decided to move to painting. Richard McKinley, a brilliant pastelist, is also a brilliant oil painter. Cynthia Rosen, a palette knife oil painter, also just recently started doing watercolor for travel. There really are no rules, and you, of course, can do anything you want. The issue comes down to, are you confusing the audience? I'm a big fan in marketing, a single focus when you're branding and marketing. So if you were to walk up to somebody or wake them in their sleep and say, what kind of a painter is Cynthia Rosen? The instant answer is, well, she's a oil palette knife painter. And so you want them to know what you are. You could argue there's room for saying that you're lots of things, and that's okay. But if you don't want to confuse people, you might want to wait till you're really selling well and very established, and then maybe kind of start talking about the other things you do. Doesn't mean you can't do them. And I would not do separate websites. Show who you are, whatever it is. And what matters most is that you're showing great artwork and showing that you're a competent and hopefully a great artist, and get known for something. And consumers easily get confused. They're not paying very close attention anyway. So there's not a right or wrong, but I do think you could ding your sales a touch if you confuse consumers. So I hope that helps. Next question comes from Cindy Lund, who says, I have a website. How do I get in front of other people? Well, I think it's a good question, Cindy. I heard from a person recently who said, now that I have a website, I'm surprised that, the phone hasn't been ringing off the wall with people buying my art. Well, it's just not the case. Just having a website is kind of like having your name in the phone book. It's not going to do anything unless people are coming to it. They're coming to it because they're looking for you, just like the phone book, or unless they stumble onto you by accident. Now, that can happen. There are lots of ways to drive traffic. The first is organic search, meaning you show up in a search for another item. Let's say somebody searches the term watercolor painting, and you show up on at the top of the watercolor painting search, which is probably unlikely unless you're really, really, really getting a lot of hits. Used to be easy to manipulate what they call SEO, which is search engine optimization, but it's less easy today. Google now knows all the tricks and prevents them, but I'd suggest maybe you blog weekly on your site. Make sure that lots of keywords are in it, keywords being things that people would be searching for, like the term oil painting or painting of children or whatever it is you do. And then if enough people read your blog, you're going to show up more in search, because if people are clicking on your website, Google's going to note that. So I would write your blog, email link to your list, your newsletter list or whatever, and hope that they click on it. And you should be building a list anyway. We've talked about that in the past. And you should be putting your blog on social media so people can click there. And clicks from different computers will signal Google to help it show your stuff more. They tend to reward success. Driving people to your website isn't enough, though. What you do once you get them there is a bigger question. And if you want them to buy or to look or to take some particular action, then you need to optimize for that. And that's another subject for another time. I talk about it in my book a little bit. Also, advertising is the most common way to drive people to a website. Remember that you want qualified art buying customers. If you've got a lot of people who love art but they don't buy art, that's not going to do you any good. In my magazine, for instance, PleinAir magazine, the readers buy lots of art. Even the artists buy lots of art. But you got the people who follow the circuit, go to the PleinAir events, the collectors, they're buying art and they love PleinAir paintings, and so that's a good place to advertise and get them to come to your website. Or, my magazine, Fine Art Connoisseur, same kind of thing. You've got all these qualified art collectors, even things like Fine Art Today, PleinAir Today, Realism Today, American Watercolor, the things that are going to reach the people who are going to buy are going to make a big difference. But you want audiences that are proven buyers, because if you just grab audiences in general, that's just not help enough. You want things you want to reach people who are going to buy. So I hope that helped you. And that's the Marketing Minute. A reminder to get your seats for the PleinAir convention before they disappear. Also, the price increase is coming up. Get them at pleinairconvention.com. The PleinAir Salon Art Competition, we're halfway through the entry time. You want to get those entries in pretty soon. You can win $15K and the cover of PleinAir magazine. That's at pleinairsalon.com. And the Van Gogh, Picasso, Cezanne pilgrimage trip that we're going to do, Provence and Nice. There are still a couple seats on that, so that's at finearttrip.com. A lot of things to remember, I know. And here's one more. I do this thing on Sunday called Sunday Coffee. It's up to a couple 100,000 readers now. I'm just absolutely blown away by that. Anyway, you can get it coming to you free, coffeewitheric.com. This is fun to do. Let's do it again sometime, like next week. I will see you then. My name is Eric Rhodes. I'm the publisher and founder of PleinAir magazine and a PleinAir painter myself. Remember, it's a big world. Go out and paint it. And since summer's almost over, I think I'm going to just kind of hang up my headphones and go painting right now. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
This has been the PleinAir Podcast with PleinAir Magazine's Eric Rhodes. You can help spread the word about PleinAir painting by sharing this podcast with your friends. And you can leave a review or subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every week. And you can even reach Eric by email, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Be sure to pick up our free ebook, 240 Plein Air Painting Tips by some of America's top painters. It's free at pleinairtips.com. Tune in next week for more great interviews. Thanks for listening.